So today, I'm making this video in response to a comment that was left by one of our subscribers who has upset me rather much. And because he's not engaging in conversation, he left a reference to a verse on a video, an old video, one of the first ones that I made. So he left this verse on there, didn't say anything about it, didn't say what he meant by it. He didn't say if he was asking a question or if he was making a statement by putting it there. He just put the reference. So I asked him about it. What does he mean about that? Because he could mean, a couple of different things. And I asked him. And he came back with a snide comment. Don't you think the Old Testament is just as valuable as the New Testament? And what am I supposed to say to that? I just asked him a question. He refused to answer my simple question about what he means and asked me a question instead. So it upset me quite a bit. I deleted the comment. I don't like those kind of comments where you just leave a reference and you refuse to answer, what do you mean by leaving this reference? People who do that are up to no good. They're there to cause trouble. They're not there to engage and ask questions or talk about where they left the reference. They're there to cause problems. And I won't have any of that. But I'm going to make a video about this anyway, as a response to the usage of this kind of verse in this kind of way. So let's go ahead and have a look at this in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 20. And I'm reading from the Septuagint, an English translation of it that was made in 2012. If you need a copy of that, which I do recommend you use for the Old Testament, I would be glad to give you a link. I'm going to put one up on the website. By the way, the website, we now have the table of false teachers and false prophets. And they're not all in there yet, but the table's up there. It's usable. It's got a couple in there right now, but you'll find that. And it's got a menu now, the little mobile menu up in the upper left. So you can click on that, get the menu, get to the false teachers and false prophets. Let's get into Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 20. Now, this is the reference that he left on the video, Do I Have to Sin? Can I Stop Sinning? And that's where I go through 1 John chapter 1 and analyze it the way that John wrote it and in context. Because those are some of the verses in the whole Bible that are taken out of context the most often and abused. They're used for exactly the opposite of what they say. And these people can't see it. They'll read 1 John 1:6 or 1:8, and they will think it means that it applies to people, Christians who are walking in the light. It says exactly as if you walk in the darkness. If we walk in the darkness, it says. It's not about those who are walking in the light. Verse 7 and verse 9 are about those walking in the light. Anyway, you can go look at that. I'll put a link to it up over here. Let's get into this. Verse 20 of chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes reads, "Wisdom will help the wise man more than 10 mighty men which are in the city." Now, he probably didn't read the Septuagint. He probably reads NIV, NASB, King James, New King James. I don't know. Living Bible. I don't know. Who knows? He didn't say. So he just put the reference. And sometimes these can be radically different. So let's have a look at the King James as well in that verse. Sometimes, especially in Ecclesiastes, there's like one verse different. Like there'll be one extra verse in the Septuagint that wasn't in the King James or vice versa. So it could be 20 or 21, but we'll recognize it because it'll say pretty much the same thing. Oh, see, I'm off because it wasn't that. It was verse 21. He puts 20, which must be the King James reference. This is the one in King James. "For there is not a righteous man in the earth who will do good and not sin." Yeah, that's the one he put. So go to here, and it's verse 20. "For there is not a just man upon earth that doeth good and sinneth not." So this is in the King James, verse 20 of chapter 7. In the Septuagint, there's an extra verse in this chapter. And so that's why it's on verse 21. "For there is not a righteous man in the earth who will do good and not sin." So the King James is missing a verse in the Bible in Ecclesiastes 7. All right, so you look at that and you say, oh, so there's not anyone in the earth who who will not sin. So it means that we will all sin. Now, you say, so I can't stop sinning. No, that's not what it says. And when you read it, you can read it one of two ways. You can say, it means that everyone will sin at least once in their life. And therefore, there's no one on the earth who will not sin, who will do good and not sin, at least once. It doesn't say who will not stop sinning. It doesn't say that. So the best that you could say about this is you could say, it means that there won't be a human being on the earth, because man means human being here. It's anthropos. So it's a bad translation even on that level, which most of them are. So there is not a righteous human being in the earth who will do good and not sin. Okay, all right. Well, that's not what it says either when I looked at the Greek. So let's have a look at here. And when we get to the Greek, it's actually verse 20 again, because of the Greek. I hit the wrong one. All right, so let's go over here, Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 20, I believe it is. Yeah, here's anthropos right here. It's man. Okay, human being, right? Man-faced. It's not on there, which is man. So it says that a man not is being righteous in the earth. In the earth. Could be soil, could be country. This is a difficult word. So it might not be referring to the entire earth. It could be referring to the country. And it is quite possible, because Solomon was the king of Israel who wrote this. And so he could have been referring to his country, that there's not a righteous man in the country. Okay? Now let's go back just a minute and have a look at this again, the English. It says, for there's not a righteous man in the earth. How about in the King James? For there's not a righteous man upon the earth, upon earth. Okay? But it's not upon earth, because as we saw, it says the earth. Not upon earth, and it's not upon, it's in the earth. And in sounds, it can be used for earth like the entire globe, right? But it also, because of in, could be the country. Okay? Who, this is who or which, in this case who, because it's masculine. Who will do, this is will do good, and here's not again, a slightly different form where it's an X instead of a K on the end, will not sin. Okay? So, you say, but that's pretty much the same. Well, it's not really. It says that a man not is being righteous. Not there is not a man. There is not a righteous man. Righteous doesn't come before man, and it's not even connected here. It's not even connected. And you don't have not is being before. It's not man. A man not is being, which in English is not being. It's not there's not a man, because not would come before man. So this is a problem. They didn't translate it right in either case. That a man is not being righteous in the land which doeth good, and which will do good and will not sin. All right, so you look at that and you say, there is definitely a problem here. Okay? There's definitely a problem with the translation and interpreting it from that. So it will need some translation work. But even apart from that, let's look at the context. I have seen, this is Solomon's journal. This whole Ecclesiastes is Solomon's diary. He's telling an experiment that he did. He starts by talking about that. I sought out to find wisdom and take hold of her, to find the meaning of life. And I explored it this way, and it was meaningless. And I explored it this way, and it was meaningless. And I explored it this way, and it was meaningless. And these are all the different ways that different kinds of men think are the right way for the meaning of life. And he's pursuing that and finding those desolate, that nothing can grow there. Okay, it's chasing after the wind. I think of my dog in the car trying to bite after the wind when I was growing up. So that's what he's doing. It's a journal. I have seen all things in the days of my vanity. There is a just man perishing in his justice, and there is an ungodly man remaining in his wickedness. Okay, and he goes on talking about this. And here he goes on. He says, be not very just, neither be very wise, lest you be confounded. Well, that reminds us of what Paul said, that God will confound the wise of the earth, of this world. The wise man, the philosopher, will be confounded. Be not very wicked, and be not stubborn. Okay, so be not very wise sounds like the New Testament gospel, that we must be humble. We must humble ourselves before God. That's also the message in the Old Testament. It's here as well. Be not very just, neither be very wise. Don't think of yourself as being very just or very wise. Be humble about yourself. It doesn't mean that you're supposed to go around saying that you sin when you don't sin. Or if you do sin, go around talking about how you sinned and not stopping your sin. It's not what it's saying. Be not very just, neither be very wise, lest you be confounded. Don't go around acting like you're wise and just, because if you're, and it means wiser than what you are or more just than what you are, because you may be confounded. You can't be confounded if you are saying you are wise in the way that you are wise, if you're holding back the measure according to what you have. Let's keep going. Be not very wicked, and be not stubborn, lest you should die before your time. It is well for you to hold fast by this, also by this, defile not your hand. For to them that fear God, all things shall come forth well. Okay, so well is not in the text, evidently, because it's in italics. Then it says, wisdom will help the wise man more than 10 mighty men which are in the city. For there's not a righteous man in the earth who will do good and not sin. Now, you see, all right, but we're back at the same verse and it still says the same thing. It doesn't say the same thing now. Remember that this verse started with a very key word that seems insignificant, but it's the most significant one in the entire sentence or the entire verse. And that's this word here, hoti. Hoti means that. It's a conjunction. It's tying the previous idea to the current idea, making them dependent on each other in a certain way, one of them dependent on the other one, or equally dependent. In this case, one of them is dependent on the other one. This verse 20 is dependent on verse 19. At least verse 19, and perhaps more that comes before it. So let's have a look at that context. So 19, it says, it is well for you to hold fast by this, also by this defile not your hand, for to them that fear God all things shall come forth well. Wisdom will help this is verse 19 in the Greek part. So wisdom will help the wise man more than 10 mighty men which are in the city. All right, so you're a wise man, and you're calling on men to come help you. And even if you were able to call on 10 very mighty men, they're not going to help you nearly as much as wisdom will. Even if they come to your aid, they will not be able to help you nearly as much as wisdom itself will. That's what he's saying right here. that there is not a righteous man in the earth. All right? That a man is not being righteous. That's what it says. Remember, we saw in the Greek that a man is not being righteous in the land who will do good and not sin. So, I hope you see it now, all right? The reason these 10 mighty men will not help is because of here's number 21. For a human being is not being righteous in the land who will do good and not sin. That's the definition of being righteous, is to do good and not sin. We see that in the first letter of John, 1 John 3. So to do good and not sin, or as Paul puts it in Romans 8:1, in the half of the verse that most of the modern Bibles are missing, is that for those who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Walk not according to the flesh is to not sin. According to the Spirit is to do what is right or good. So we have walking according to the flesh or according to the Spirit right here, right, in this verse as well. For a human being is not being righteous who will do good, walk according to the Spirit, and not sin, not walk according to the flesh. Okay, so for a human being is not being righteous in the land. Right? So he's saying that human beings in his country are not being righteous. They are not willing to do what is good and not sin. And so that explains why wisdom will help the wise man more than 10 mighty men which are in the city. Because people were not willing to stop sinning and do what is good, and therefore they were not righteous. It's not making a general cosmological statement about human beings throughout all time and all places on the earth not able to stop sinning. This is willingness to sin. This is a willingness to sin and an unwillingness to do good. So he's talking about. So you have to keep this in context because they're directly connected. Now, you see in the English text, they put a period and separate these into sentences. It doesn't matter. It still has that word for at the beginning to represent hoti. It's a conjunction. It means that this is dependent on that. And therefore, you have to understand this only in the context of this previous statement. That's all he's saying. He's not saying more than that. And he can't say what they're using this verse for because then it contradicts everything else in the Bible. And I'll show you one here in the Old Testament that it directly contradicts, because if this verse means that there cannot be or is not a righteous man in all the earth throughout all time, then you have a few problems, not the least of which is Job 1:1. Let's turn there. I'm sorry, I didn't turn on so you could see the scriptures with me. Here we go. All right. So there was a certain man in the land of Ausis. This is the Septuagint translation, whose name was Job, and I think that means that. I think that's a misspelling. Yeah, all right. So it's not then. That. And that man was true, blameless, righteous, and godly, abstaining from every evil. Now you tell me how God's testimony, this is not someone else speaking. This is God's testimony. It's not someone's opinion about Job. It's God's opinion about Job. That he was true, he was blameless, he was righteous. We just saw that righteous means to do good and not do sin. And it said that there's no one, according to the King James translation and how that these people use it, that there's no one righteous. And yet this says right here that Job was righteous and godly. This means reverent. He revered God, abstaining from everything evil. Okay? And I translated those last words here. That he was truthful. This is the literal translation, so pretty close to what they translated. That he was truthful, blameless, equitably righteous, because righteous means equitable, actually, literally, the Greek does. Revering God, holding off from every evil activity. From every evil activity. How could Job be a completely upright man if he were still sinning? It is impossible. They're exclusively of each other, sin and righteousness. You cannot be righteous if you are sinning, and you cannot sin if you are doing righteousness, else it is not actually righteousness. How could Job be blameless if he were still sinning? Impossible. How could you say that Job revered God if he were still sinning? Lastly, how could Job be both holding off from every evil activity and yet not be holding off from every sinful activity? Evil and sinful, they're the same thing. The twisting of Scripture is now crystal clear, but they do not want to hear that they have to quit sinning. These people who are using these verses that way, they don't let the verse say what it was written to say. They take it out of context and try to apply it in a way it's not meant to be applied, to support their preconception that they cannot help but stop sinning. But Jesus condemns them in John 3. In John 3, Jesus told us why, in the words of the condemnation, right? Why they don't want to hear and quit sinning. Verse 19 of 3. And this is the condemnation, the light has come into the world, this is King James. And men loved darkness rather than light. That's why. Because their deeds were evil. They did not want to stop their deeds. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. Implying that if they're reproved, that means he has to stop them. He doesn't want to. He loves his darkness because his deeds are evil. And so when someone takes a verse like this out of context and uses it to support the idea that I can't help but sin as long as I'm in the body, or I cannot stop sinning, or no, they won't say just about themselves. They'll say no one can stop sinning, right? That's their argument. They are revealing their own condemnation. Their condemnation is proven by Jesus Christ, the Son of God, in John 3, starting in verse 19 and verse 20, which is only 3 verses after John 3:16, so you're completely without excuse. If you've read John 3:16, you have to have read John 3:19 and 20, because the red letters keep going until just a few verses after that. So there's no excuse then. These people have taken it, first off, by taking that stand. I'm just reading my notes here, which they take from the apostate churches. They deny the sacrifice of Christ if they mean that there has never been anyone who never sinned on the earth. Christ was a man born on the earth and died on the earth, and he was completely without sin. So if they are claiming that Ecclesiastes 7.20 means that there never has been and never will be a human being on the face of the earth who did not sin or even didn't quit sinning, that every human being who's ever lived and ever will live on the earth has had sin, then they deny the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. because the sacrifice is predicated on his sinlessness. If he sinned, his sacrifice was insufficient to cover the sins of all. So it's not powerful enough then. And so the twisting of Ecclesiastes 7.20 is a lie. And I'm not saying this guy lied by using it. I'm saying it's a lie that's being propagated in the churches. It also does not mean there was anyone besides Christ who never sinned. Now, what I mean is, so we all have sinned at least once in our lives, okay? But it means Christ removes our sins and gives us the command to stop sinning. I'm going to read you a passage here in a minute. I mean, the whole chapter, except one or two verses, maybe the whole chapter. So everyone except Christ has sinned. That's clear. But not everyone remains with sin. If you do not stop sinning, you will not inherit the kingdom of God. That's Paul in Romans. All who continue to sin are of the devil. That's John in 1 John. Even the demons believe in God and shiver. Believing without action is dead and useless to save. Jacob, aka James. And then here is from the author of Hebrews. For it is impossible for those who were once enlightened and have tasted of the heavenly gift and were made partakers of the Holy Ghost and have tasted the good word of God and the powers of the world to come, if they shall fall away, to renew them again unto repentance, seeing they crucify to themselves the Son of God afresh and put him to open shame. Now this last one you say, oh, but that's about falling away. Isn't that something bigger than just sinning, right? Okay, well, I'm actually going to be reading from the book of Hebrews. So you'll see what he meant as I read this other chapter, in chapter 10. So let's go ahead and turn over there and get started with it. So here we are in Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 7. This is Christ speaking. Then said I, Lo, I come, in the volume of the book it is written of me, meaning the Old Testament, to do thy will, O God. I come to do thy will. Above when he said, sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings, and offering for sin thou wouldst not, neither hadst pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Then said he, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He taketh away the first, that he may establish the second. Now, it's quite difficult in this King James, right, to understand what he's saying, because there's a lot of these thous and it's right? So let's go ahead and look at it a little closer here. So he says, look, I come, as it was written about me, in the volume of the book, to do your will, God. And then the narrator says above, when he said, referring to what Christ said, sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings and offering for sin, thou wouldest not. Okay? You really didn't want that. Neither hadst pleasure therein. You didn't even have pleasure in it, which are offered by the law. Then said he, Lo, meaning look, I come to do your will, O God. Then the narrator explains, he takes away the first, that he may establish the second. Now, here's what some people do. They'll read this and they'll say, oh, see, he took the law away, so he could establish doing God's will in place of that. But that's not quite what it says. Because the argument here is about the offering, not about the law. The law requires an offering. And without the law, the offering of Christ himself would make no sense. It was meaningless without the law. So it's not the law he's doing away with. It's the sacrifice and offering and burnt offerings, the offering for sin that was made all the time, constantly. The priests had to keep making them. They weren't sufficient. And so they had to keep making them. And Christ came and he made one sacrifice for all in his body by obeying the will of God. That's what he means by obeying the will of God. Okay, he came to do the will of God, to take away the first, not the law, because the law is what required that sacrifice of Christ. Okay, so, and if the law is done away with, that sacrifice ceases to have meaning. But the sacrifice of Christ's body continues to have meaning throughout time because the law still exists and is still potent, is not impotent, as they argue. It's the sacrifice and burnt offerings of men that was done away with. Okay, so keep that straight. And if you read this, look at the very beginning here. For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto perfect. It's not the law that couldn't make them perfect. It's the sacrifices that the men were offering that were imperfect themselves, that could not ever complete perfection, complete the people. For then would they not have ceased to be offered? Because that the worshippers, once purged, should have had no more conscience of sins. But in those sacrifices, there is a remembrance again made of sins every year, for it of the sins that were committed. He's not talking about not having a conscience of sins that you're going to commit, like you make a sacrifice and then you go and commit a sin and you don't feel bad about it. No, he's not talking about that. He's talking about awareness of past sins. Those sins would not have been taken away. Because if they'd been taken away, they wouldn't remember them the next year when they make another sacrifice on the same sins. But in those sacrifices, there's a remembrance again made of sins every year. So those sacrifices are for the sins of this year, but they also remind the sinner of the previous sins. He still feels guilty. It hasn't been taken care of perfectly. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins. So it says. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he saith, sacrifice and offering thou wouldst not, but a body hast thou prepared me. Referring to Christ's flesh. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, thou hast had no pleasure. And then we get the verses we just read. So this is not about the law. This is about the sacrifices and the nature of those sacrifices, the quality of those sacrifices, and the power of those sacrifices to take away sin. And that Jesus' body, by obeying God's will, was prepared to take away the sins of man. It's not about getting rid of the law at all. It doesn't say that at all here. It doesn't have any indication of that here. Okay, so let's keep going. So he says, he taketh away the first, the offerings of goats and bulls, that he may establish the second, the offering of his will in his own flesh that God prepared to do that will, to become a sacrifice. By which will, right? That's what it means, the which will. By which will, his ability to obey God, by the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. There it is, his flesh. His flesh was made into a sacrifice because he perfectly fulfilled the will of God. It was his will, to do thy will, O God, right there, verse 7, to do thy will, O God, right? Then he said, Lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He take away the first, that he may establish the second. The doing of the will of God perfectly to prepare his body as the sacrifice for sins. By the which will, by his will, the will of God, we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. You say, well, that's the will of God, not the will of Christ. They're the same. He says, I come to do thy will, O God. I come to make my will exactly like yours, which is the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane is probably the most important event equal to the sacrifice of Christ on the cross and the resurrection of him from the dead in the tomb. And people miss that. There are three events there at the end that are critical and equally important to the Christian life. Because if Christ had not submitted his will perfectly to God, which is which is epitomized in the garden, where he struggled the most with that, then the sacrifice of Christ on the cross makes no sense. It's meaningless. It's useless. If he doesn't completely submit himself perfectly to the Father, then his sacrifice is tainted and powerless as the goats and the bulls. And then he doesn't raise from the dead. Very important. Verse 11. And every priest standeth daily ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. He's referring to the offerings of the Old Testament. 12. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God. He finished his offering of the sacrifice and sat down at the right hand of God. This man, notice, if there's not a man in all the earth, then Jesus sinned. I'm referring to Ecclesiastes 7.20. Again, it cannot mean that. And you can see by this chapter, it cannot mean that. From henceforth expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. So he sat down at the right hand of God. From now on, expecting that there will come a time where his enemies will be made his footstool. They will be under his feet. 14. Now keep that in mind, enemies, because he clarifies who are enemies of God. For by one offering he hath perfected forever them that are sanctified. And perfected, that word literally means completed. And I'll go check it up just to make sure that it's the same here, but it is. Yeah, right here. So this is from Teleos, which is, if you look here, you can see it's, look over here on the left, you'll see it change when I hover over it. It's from Teleos, actually, literally. All right, it means to complete, not to perfect. Okay, so you can see that when you extend it out and you get all these figurative language stuff, anything after this colon and dash, that's figurative language. You ignore that because that's interpretation. It's not literal. This is literal right here. It means to complete. Okay. All right. So let's go back and keep reading. So for by one offering he hath completed forever them that are sanctified. Okay. Whereof the Holy Ghost also is a witness to us. For after that he had said before, this is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. Okay? So if law is no longer meaningful, and we're not to obey law, then why has he put his laws in our hearts and in our minds, written them there? Because we are bound to obedience to them. They're not external to us now, they're internal to us. And their sins and iniquities I will remember no more. This is an interesting word, iniquities. Let's have a look at that and see what it means. Pull it up in the Greek here. And the sins of them and the lawlessness of them. So here's lawlessness, anomia. A means without, and nomia is law. So lawlessness, without law, is from 459, anomos, which is negative particle meaning without, and this means law. So, and the sins of them and the lawlessness of them. Okay? The sins of them and the lawlessness of them. This is so to remember no more. Okay? And it's absolutely not. It's double negative. So it's very strong. Okay? Not only their sins, their lack of an allotment in the kingdom of God, but also their lawlessness will I remember no more. Does that mean that we can continue to be lawless and he will not remember it? No, It doesn't mean lawlessness stops having significance. It has significance because Jesus said, on the last day, I will say, away from me, you workers of lawlessness, I never ever knew you. Okay? So it means the lawlessness of the past, the sins of the past. Okay? And we see that here. All right? So he says here, he will put his laws in our hearts, and in our minds he will write them. And their sins and their lawlessness I will absolutely not remember anymore. Now, where remission of these is, there is no more offering for sin. So if your sin has been remissed, like a river, like receding, right? Then why is there a need for offering for sin if the sin has remissed, has receded? Not only has it been forgiven, but it's also gone away. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he hath consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh. And having a high priest over the house of God, that's Jesus, let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of faith. That's persuasion. That's not like magical belief in something that you aren't sure of. No, it's persuasion. Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of persuasion, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience. Not meaning the evil conscience gets to stay. That's not what it means. Having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. That's not to clean the body. That's a dedication to God. That you're going to stop sinning and you're going to do what's right. 23, that's basic, it's baptism. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith, our persuasion. Let's hold on to professing our persuasion without wavering, for he is faithful who promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much more as ye see the day approaching. Why? If sin doesn't mean anything anymore, if you can commit sin and it doesn't mean anything to God, then why would you need to do this? You need to do this because sin does mean the same thing as before. The definition and the punishment of sin has not changed. It's not changed. The difference is that the sin that you had that could not be taken care of by the Old Testament sacrifices was finally able to be taken care of by Christ, so that it's taken off, so that you can forget it. You cannot remember it anymore because God doesn't remember it anymore. But you need to stop sinning. Stop creating more sin. Let's keep going with this. Exhorting one another, and so much more as ye see the day approaching. Verse 26, for if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. Okay? If we sin willfully after we've received the knowledge of the truth, there remains no more sacrifice for sins. That sounds like what I read earlier of Hebrews 6. Let me remind you of that. If they shall fall away, to renew them again unto repentance, seeing they crucify to themselves the Son of God afresh and put him to an open shame. Okay? So it's impossible for those that if they fall away, to renew them again unto repentance. It's impossible. It's impossible to renew them again unto repentance, seeing they crucified to themselves the Son of God afresh and put him to an open shame. Okay, let's go back to Hebrews 10. We're down in 17, I think. Now, 18. Now, where remission of these is, there's no more offering for sin. Oh, here. Let us hold fast. For if we, 26, for if we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. You become an adversary of God. You become an adversary of God. That is scary. This, more than anything, maybe not more than anything, but equally to anything else in the New Testament, rebukes the people who say that you cannot lose your salvation. Do you think this person still has salvation? There remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. So if you sin again, there's no sacrifice for it. You're guilty and it cannot be forgiven. It is an unpardonable sin. But a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fiery indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Remember, that's a law that was written externally on stone tablets. And anyone who despised that law, meaning broke it, died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. So it only took 2 or 3 people to agree and testify publicly that you committed one of those sins to be put to death. That's pretty harsh. The whole world believes that's too harsh because Moses' law is criticized all the time, and we as Christians are criticized for believing in the Mosaic law. Verse 29. And God said he's going to take his laws and he's going to put them in our hearts and write them on our minds. That's the same law. It's not different. It's the same law. But now it's inside. Of how much sorer punishment, suppose ye, shall he be thought worthy who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace. So the author is asking you to judge. And it's a rhetorical question, meaning that the person who tramples underfoot the Son of God in this new covenant where the laws are put inside our hearts and written on our minds, so we don't have to obey something external to us, but we hear it and we know it inside. And if we still continue to disobey that and resist and willfully sin against that, how much more do you think that person deserves to be punished than the person who broke Moses' law written on some tablets external to the person? Because those tablets are not part of me. But God's law is part of me now. And I'm going to sin against God and against myself when I break his laws now. Then I'm sinning against God. And perhaps you could argue against the community. But now I'm sinning against God and the community and myself as well, because it's inside my heart and written on my mind. How much more severe punishment do I deserve because of breaking that covenant? Verse 30, for we know him that hath said, vengeance belongeth unto me. I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. That's his people. That's us. That's not the Jews. That's us. The Jews were his people. We are his people now. And this is written to Christian. They're Hebrews. They're the Jews, Jewish Christians, like Peter was, like Paul was, like John was, like James was, like every one of the apostles were, and Paul, and most of the early church until Cornelius and his household became believers. So it's to them as well. The Lord shall judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. For someone who is among his people, God's people, to fall into the hands of the living God for judgment. But call to remembrance the former days in which after ye were illuminated, ye endured a great fight of afflictions. Okay? Now he's going into the punishments. He says down here, he says, so for ye had compassion of me in my bonds and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods. So people ruining their houses and the things they owned, they took it joyfully. They didn't get angry, knowing in yourselves that ye have in heaven a better and an enduring substance. You have a treasure in heaven that cannot be touched by them. 35, cast not away therefore your confidence. Don't cast out your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. In other words, your confidence, if you hold fast to it, has an amazing reward. Don't throw out your confidence. For ye have need of patience. You need to be patient. That after you have done the will of God, here's the will of God again, that Jesus brought up above, right? That after you've done the will of God, ye might receive the promise. You will not receive the promise if you do not do the will of God and be patient and hold fast to doing the will of God to the end. You will not receive the reward. Paul talks about it constantly. And what is the reward? The reward is eternal life, because he talks about judgment. This is in contrast to the judgment of God with fiery indignation. And this is eternal life. For ye have need of patience, that after ye have done the will of God, ye might receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come, and will not tarry, will not hesitate. Now the just shall live by faith, by persuasion, being persuaded. The just shall live by faith. That doesn't say that if you have faith, you are just. That's saying that if you are just, the only just person that is counted just is the just man who is just and lives by faith. Is just and lives by faith. Okay? The just shall live by faith. The just used to live by the external written law before, but now the just lives by the internally written law and the law put in our hearts, the persuasion in God that comes from that. But if any man draw back, from being just and being just by faith, by persuasion, my soul shall have no pleasure in him. But we are not of them that draw back unto perdition. That's damnation. That's total destruction. That's what happens in the burning lake of sulfur. In other words, he's saying, if you draw back, you will be among those who are cast into the burning lake of sulfur for total destruction as adversaries of God. We are not of them who draw back unto perdition, but of them that believe, that's persuasion again, but of them that are persuaded to the saving of the soul. Eternal salvation, eternal life. There it is. This chapter is packed with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this explains in detail the gospel and how it functions in the life of the one who is persuaded in Christ, the believer. So don't listen to these men who have given in to the message of the apostate churches, who want to convince you of sinful nature lordship. That's what I'm calling it now, because that's what Jesus called it, that whoever you obey is your master. And if you obey sin, sin is your master. But Jesus said that if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. Free of sin, being your master. But then if you go back and you obey sin again, you're making sin your master again. And Jesus said you can only serve one master. Only one. And if you're going to go back and serve sin again, you have made sin your master. And those Christians who say that they can't help but sin as long as they're in the body, they're telling you who their master is, and it's not Jesus Christ. No matter how much they say Jesus Christ is their Lord, if they say that they cannot help but sin as long as they're in the body, they are calling themselves a liar, and they're letting you know that up front, that sin is their Lord. It doesn't matter if they sin just on Mondays. Sin is still their Lord. You can only serve one master. And if you've chosen sin, you have not chosen Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ said, stop sinning or something worse may happen. He also said, go and sin no more. And that's not where it stops. It keeps going. John 3:19 and 20 I read to you, where men loved darkness because their deeds were evil. They refused to stop sinning. As long as you sin, your deeds are evil, and you're going to hate the light and not come into it. And you're going to love the darkness. That's how it is. Jesus Christ himself declared that immediately after John 3:16. So there's no way around it, and you have no excuse. So stop sinning. May the Lord bless you as you seek him and obey him with all your heart. Remember to subscribe down below and like the video and share it on your Facebook and other social media. And then make a comment, whether a question or a comment. We read all of them, and we try to respond to all. Get on over to our website, The Rooted Word, and start reading the translation and also the articles we've posted. It's at therootedword.com, therootedword.com. And may the Lord bless you as you seek him with all your heart.